The billionaire was seconds from saying, "I do." Then his housekeeper's 6-year-old son stood up in the third row and yelled, "Mr. Daniel, that's the man from the garage. Hey, stop scrolling for a second. I need you to actually sit with this one, because what happened at this wedding is the kind of thing that changes how you look at every quiet person standing in the background of your own life." A 34-year-old billionaire. A wedding worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. 300 guests in silk and diamonds, and a 6-year-old boy who had no idea, when he stood up in his small rented suit, that the single sentence he was about to say would stop a wedding that everyone else in that room was too polite, or too afraid, or too dazzled to stop themselves. Stay with me. You need to hear how this one ends. Hey, welcome back, everybody. If this is your first time in this corner of the internet, welcome to the family. We tell stories here that don't just pass through you, they stay. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight, because I read every single one, and I genuinely love knowing who's sitting with me when these stories land. And if stories about quiet people, hidden truths, and the moments that change everything are your kind of thing, go ahead and hit subscribe right now. You won't regret it. Okay, let's get into it, because this one's going to sit with you. There's a particular kind of loneliness that only exists once you already won everything you thought you wanted, and Daniel Reyes had been living inside that loneliness for longer than anyone watching his life from the outside would ever have guessed. At 34, he ran Reyes Dynamics, a logistics and shipping empire worth north of $3 billion, built from nothing but a second-hand truck and a stubborn refusal to lose. He had a glass house on the bluffs above the coast, a private hangar, the kind of name that got him a table anywhere in the world without ever needing to ask. From the outside, Daniel Reyes had everything. From the inside, most nights ended the same way. A glass of bourbon he rarely finished, sitting alone on a terrace that looked out over more ocean than any one man had any earthly use for, feeling a particular kind of hollow that none of it had ever quite managed to fill. He hadn't always been hollow. He'd grown up the son of a long-haul trucker who died on an icy stretch of highway when Daniel was 19, and a mother who'd cleaned office buildings at night to keep the lights on, and who'd told him, more times than he could count, that a man's real wealth was measured by who showed up for him when he had nothing left to offer in return. He'd never forgotten the words. He'd simply, somewhere between his first 10 million and his first billion, lost the knack of actually living by them. His relationships never lasted, not for lack of women interested in lasting. Daniel had a gift, honed hard over a decade of negotiations, for reading a room in under a minute, from catching the half-second hesitation that meant someone was telling him what he wanted to hear rather than what was true. He'd been loved, more times than he wanted to count, for the empire rather than the boy underneath it, until Vanessa. Vanessa Cole had walked into his life at a charity gala 18 months earlier, 29 then, sharp and self-possessed in a way that had genuinely startled him, because she hadn't seemed remotely interested in being startled by him in return. She'd kept him waiting on their second date. She'd argued with him, plainly and without flattery, about a business decision he'd later admitted, privately, that she'd been right about. She made him laugh in a way he hadn't laughed in years, and Daniel, starved for exactly that kind of honesty, had fallen for her quickly and completely. He had not, in 18 months, ever once met her exactly the way he'd met everyone in his own household, quietly, plainly, without performance. If you've ever sensed something was wrong long before you had proof, and wished, just once, that someone would finally say it out loud for you, this story is exactly for you. Keep watching, because we're only just getting to the part that matters. Rosa Delgado had worked as Daniel's housekeeper for nearly 5 years, since before Vanessa, since before the engagement, since back when the glass house on the bluffs had felt considerably emptier than it did now. She was quiet, exacting, devoted to a job most employers in Daniel's position barely noticed was being done at all, and she had raised her son Mateo largely within those same walls, the boy having grown up underfoot in Daniel's kitchen and hallways since he was barely old enough to walk. Daniel adored him. Mateo, in turn, adored Daniel with the uncomplicated, total devotion small children reserve for the few adults who actually crouch down to their level and listen, rather than simply patting them on the head and moving on to more important business. It was Mateo, 3 months before the wedding, who had first mentioned, with no particular weight attached to the observation that the lady's friend with the motorcycle came to the garage a lot when Mr. Daniel wasn't home. Rosa had hushed him at the time, embarrassed, assuming a child's confused account of some perfectly innocent visit, and had not thought to mention it to Daniel at all, not wanting to trouble a man already deep in wedding preparations with a 6-year-old's garbled observation that almost certainly meant nothing. She would think of that hushing later with considerable regret. The wedding itself was, by every outward measure, exactly the kind of event the society pages had been breathlessly previewing for weeks. 10,000 white roses, an orchestra flown in from Vienna, 300 guests seated beneath a glass pavilion built specifically for the occasion and dismantled the following week. Daniel stood at the altar in a charcoal morning suit, the ring steady in his hand, his eyes fixed on Vanessa as she came down the aisle in a dress that had taken a Parisian atelier 4 months to complete. He had waited, he believed, 18 months for exactly this moment. His hands did not shake, and then a small voice broke through the orchestra's last swelling note, clear and trembling and absolutely unwilling to be quieted. "Mr. Daniel, that's the man from the garage." The entire pavilion turned. Matteo stood in the third row, having slipped free of Rosa's hand and climbed onto his chair for a better view. One small finger pointed not at the altar, but back toward the rear of the gathering, toward a man in an expensive gray suit Daniel did not immediately recognize among the crowd of Vanessa's own guests. Rosa's face drained of color. She moved toward her son in stricken, mortified horror, already mouthing apologies toward the altar, toward Daniel, toward anyone who might be looking her way with judgment in their eyes. But Daniel did not wave the moment away. He did not let the officiant smooth it over, did not glance toward his groomsmen for rescue from the awkwardness of it. He set the ring down carefully on the small velvet cushion beside him, walked down from the altar in front of 300 silent guests, and crouched to Matteo's level exactly the way he always had, exactly the way that had made the boy adore him in the first place. "What do you mean, buddy?" he said quietly. "Tell me plainly. Who's the man from the garage?" Matteo's lower lip trembled, the full weight of 300 adult eyes finally landing on him all at once, but he held Daniel's gaze and did not look away. "He comes when you're not home. The lady tells him to be quiet so the neighbors don't see, and one time I heard her call him baby, the same thing she calls you." The silence that followed had a texture to it, thick and absolute, 300 guests collectively holding their breath, the Viennese orchestra frozen mid-phrase with their instruments still raised. Vanessa made a small, sharp sound somewhere behind Daniel, swiftly swallowed, and in the back row, a man in a gray suit went very, very still. Daniel stayed crouched at Matteo's level for what felt, to everyone watching, like an eternity, though it was likely no more than 30 seconds. Then he stood, slowly, and turned to face Vanessa with the same precise, unflinching attention he gave a column of figures that didn't add up properly. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice carrying clean and level across the silent pavilion. Vanessa's composure, polished over 18 months of careful presentation, cracked for the first time Daniel had ever witnessed. "Daniel, he's a child. He's confused. I can explain." "Then explain it. Now. In front of everyone who came here today to watch us promise each other something permanent." She did not explain it, not properly, not in any way that survived contact with the gray-suited man rising slowly from the back row, his own composure breaking under the weight of 300 stares turning toward him in unison. He did not run. He simply stood there, caught, the particular stillness of a man who'd understood, the moment the boy spoke, that there was no version of the next 60 seconds that ended well for him. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene beyond the one a 6-year-old had already, unknowingly, made for him. He simply turned back to the altar, picked up the ring he had set down minutes before, and addressed his guests with a steadiness that surprised even himself. "There won't be a wedding today. I'm sorry for the trouble of everyone's travel and everyone's time. I am not sorry to have learned the truth before I said something I could not have taken back." In the weeks that followed, the story moved through the city the way stories about billionaires and broken engagements always did, fast and merciless, and considerably more interested in spectacle than in truth. Daniel weathered it the way he weathered most things, quietly, without public comment, returning to the glass house on the bluffs and finding it, for the first time in 18 months, considerably more peaceful than it had been with a wedding worth of preparation crowding every room. It was Rosa who finally came to him, nearly a month after the wedding that wasn't, standing nervously in the doorway of his study with Matteo's hand in hers. "I should have told you, 3 months ago, what Matteo mentioned about the garage. I dismissed it as a child's confusion and said nothing, and I've carried the weight of that silence every day since, wondering whether speaking up sooner might have spared you a public humiliation in front of 300 guests. You have nothing to apologize for, Rosa." Matteo said what needed saying, exactly when it needed saying, in front of the only audience large enough that the truth couldn't be quietly buried afterward. Daniel knelt to Matteo's level once more, the boy still clutching his mother's hand, uncertain whether he'd done something wonderful or terrible. "You did the bravest thing anyone did in that whole pavilion, buddy. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Matteo's small face broke into a relieved, gap-toothed grin, and Rosa, watching the two of them, felt something in her own chest ease for the first time in weeks. It was nearly 6 months before Daniel began to notice what had apparently been sitting quietly, in plain view for the whole of the 5 years. He'd known her, that Rosa Delgado ran his household with a steady, devoted competence he had never once properly thanked her for, that she had raised a remarkable, honest little boy entirely on her own, and that the quiet, unglamorous loyalty she'd shown him for half a decade was worth considerably more than the 18 months of careful performance he'd nearly married instead. He did not rush it. He had learned, the hard way, exactly what rushing cost a person who mistook performance for substance. But he began finding reasons to linger in the kitchen of an evening, to ask after Matteo's school days, to notice, properly, the woman who had been steadily, quietly present through every version of his life that mattered. A year after the wedding that never happened, Daniel Reyes married Rosa Delgado in a small ceremony in the very garden where Matteo had once played underfoot while his mother worked. No orchestra, no 10,000 roses, no 300 guests, just the people who had actually shown up for each other when it counted, exactly the way his own mother had once told him real wealth was measured. Matteo stood as the youngest groomsman the venue had ever hosted, beaming the entire ceremony, utterly certain, at 7 years old, that he'd had something to do with making this particular happy ending possible. He wasn't wrong. Here's the question I want to leave you with tonight. Is there someone steady in your own life right now, quiet, easily overlooked, the person who shows up without ever asking for credit, that your heart already knows matters, even if you've never once let yourself really look? Don't wait for a 6-year-old to have to say it for you. If this story moved you even a little, go ahead and give it a like. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. Drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it Matteo at the altar? Was it Rosa in the doorway? Was it the proposal in the garden? I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button, because we tell stories like this every week, about truth, about quiet people, and about the unexpected moments that change everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this one with me. Until next time, take care of each other.